today I talk with Josselyn Dustin, and we talk about the profound influence that the dance world has had on almost every level of what we do in Pilates. Particularly, we talk about the aesthetic influence that we've inherited from dance and how that has permeated the way that we move, the way that we cue, and even the way we think about the technique of the exercises that we're doing. And then we transition into talking about the way that the actual business mindset, in quotes there, about business mindset, from the dance world has permeated the Pilates world, and how it's perfectly compatible actually to feel that we do this for a calling and that it's something that we're extremely passionate about, and at the same time to be financially remunerated for it. We finish off by talking about what's awesome from the dance world that we have in Pilates, what's worth keeping in the present situation as we're in this pivotal kind of time of post-ish COVID, and what's worth hanging on to, and what's worth letting go. So all that coming up. Hey, Josselyn.
Hey, Raph. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's great to be here with you.
It's great to be here with you too.
Just for the folks listening at home, I guess most of us are listening at home these days. Just give us the short version of who you are and whatever it is that you want to share about what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Josselyn, and I own a really small Pilates studio based in Berkeley, California. So I'm on the other side of the world, and I run a little studio. I teach Pilates. I'm online now, and my background, I was a dancer for a long time, and then I got a BA in dance and an MFA in dance, and danced in New York, and danced, and now I do Pilates and Pilates type movement things. So there we go. There's the shortest bio ever.
That was well done.
Cool.
Yeah, we were chatting, the backstory here is we were chatting on Instagram DMs, and
Yep.
You raised something that really got me thinking, and we agreed it would be a great topic for a discussion on Pilates elephants. So do you want to lead in with the topic?
Yeah, so I had been listening to Pilates elephants, because who is not listening to Pilates elephants now? And a few other Pilates podcasts, because like any reasonable Pilates teacher, I teach all day and then I get in my car and I turn on Pilates podcasts, because that's what we do, right? That's just like the best thing to do. So I'd been engaging with some people online, listening to some podcasts, and I think recognizing that I have a specific life experience and also a specific bias coming from the dance world and then entering into the Pilates world from the dance world, just kind of started hearing things and collecting thoughts and writing down little notes, and just thinking a little more deeply about the role of the dance world and its effect on the Pilates world. And that kind of historically and also currently, and sort of like how it continues to have an effect. And not really making a judgment call about that, but just sort of looking at it through a couple different lenses. And I think because I've been engaging more online, and there was actually a specific podcast, I think it was the one I listened to with Leslie Logan, where you interviewed her and you had her on. It was a great podcast. And she mentioned this little tidbit of sort of in business practice, and she's like, a lot of dancers end up in the Pilates world. A lot of, there's some sort of things that happen about paying and about job security and just sort of overall business practices. And she just said this little clip about it, and I was like, okay, this is something that I feel needs to be discussed. And I reached out to you via Instagram and Chloe via Instagram on DMs, and I was like, I think this is an elephant. I think this is worth talking about. And then I also was like, I don't know if I'm the person to talk about this, but I do think that it's worth discussing. So here I am. I guess I was sort of the person to talk about it.
So what do you think is the elephant?
So I think there are kind of like three lenses to look at this from, and they all kind of point to sort of one thing. So we can sort of look at the ramifications in our teaching practice, kind of look at the business practices, the effect of the dance world on the Pilates world in terms of how we organize our businesses on like a micro and macro level. And then we can kind of look at the historical lens too, which is like, okay, how much do we honor the lineage and how much liberty do we take with progressing the industry forward, still saying, okay, this is where it comes from, or this is part of the history, but how much do we need to be beholden to that? And I think honestly, like all of those sort of like three categories, or at least the way that I think about them, they sort of funnel into this idea of, does this need to be intertwined? And is it intertwined? How much is it? And how does this ultimately affect our clients? So I can't, a lot of this, I would love to like present like data and things, but in terms of my clients, I don't teach any dancers right now, so, and I teach 30 sessions a week, and plus I do live stream classes. So it's not a ton of people, but, so in terms of like who we're serving and how the teachers, the Pilates teachers are being taught, what's embedded in the teacher training, what's embedded in the business practices, like how does that affect us serving our clients? If that makes some sense.
Yeah, and the thing that I think that resonates really clearly with me in what you said there is the kind of the aesthetic that we've inherited from the dance world. And, I'm not a dancer and I love dancing, but, I'm just a regular person. And something that really strikes me, and I think about this reasonably often, is like, well, if now that we're all, a lot of us just working out at home on a mat, with using a couple of tins of soup or whatever, well,
the wine bottle,
right? So totally. What makes, if I'm doing, say, I don't know, lunges on an exercise mat, right? What makes that Pilates versus quote fitness, versus yoga? What's a Pilates lunge? How's a Pilates lunge different? And I reckon, and Chloe and I have talked about this before, but I reckon that if I'm scrolling through Instagram, I can see with the sound off and the no subtitles, I can tell if it's a Pilates lunge or a fitness lunge, because the Pilates lunge looks more dance-like. Whereas fitness lunges, people are kind of a bit more robotic and have a different style of movement.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
there's one Pilates page I follow, which I kind of have a love-hate relationship with. It's called Pilates Inspiration. I follow it because, from time to time, one of my friends is featured on there. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Look, Nathan was on there or whoever was on there. And so I like to follow them and, support my friends. But about 99% of the people I see featured on there are like waif-like ballet dancers, like obviously
like gorgeous
dancers.
Feet, like long limbs, the whole thing. Yeah.
Size 6 or whatever. I don't really understand US sizes, but tiny.
I don't either. Can you tell me about US sizes? I have no clue. Please, if you have any information, send it over.
But and the words used to describe are often like, here's so and so doing a beautiful flow of this exercise, right? And I think like, well, full power, and full power to people who can do that. And I love watching people who move beautifully. Yeah. I think most of us do. But the kind of implication is that it's like, well, that, this is the ultimate expression of the art form, like this, we should all aspire to this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that some of that for dancers, it actually, in my opinion, it poses actually a challenge when dancers enter into the Pilates world and they begin their training. And for me, I know personally, there was a little bit of untraining my aesthetic eye that had to happen, where things that I had been told were so true my whole life about function, about achieving a certain movement, about movement quality, even, we could delve into like the biomechanics, and sometimes, things that we're told are just like, that's just not true. do. And we're being told that to create a certain aesthetic effect on stage, to portray a character, or to, you know, embody a certain feeling, to try to get the audience to feel something. And so when we enter into a training program, and again, I can really only speak, I've had conversations with other dancers turned Pilates instructors, but this is sort of in my opinion or my experience, you know, we are primed to look for those things. And in some ways, I think humans just in general are primed. You know, we have these, whether it's, you know, sort of indoctrinated with the culture, you know, we have these things that are considered beautiful or considered aesthetically pleasing. And so, you know, if I'm looking at a body, trying to teach that body how to move well so they can lead a really robust life, whatever that means to them, you know, does it really matter if the foot is pointed? Does it matter if they're achieving that gorgeous line? So what happens if they do and that feels like shit on their bodies? So and I think it's not a right or wrong or good or bad, because I definitely have clients who have also said to me in the studio during a session, wow, that was amazing, I just felt so elegant. And I'm like, rock on. What's wrong with feeling elegant? What is wrong with having a beautiful aesthetic experience as you are going through the Pilates repertoire or a lunge that we could call fitness or gym or Pilates or whatever? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think where it becomes a bit problematic is where there's some confusion behind, okay, if we have something that, quote, you know, air quotes, quote unquote, looks beautiful, looks correct, but on that particular body, it doesn't feel good, or it's not functional, or it's not reasonable, or it's not sustainable, then what is it that we're really working towards? You know?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's also the other area, the area where I find it most problematic is, you know, the aesthetic that, you know, we seem to have inherited seems like a classical ballet aesthetic to me. Like it's not a Martha Graham rolling around in a sock sort of aesthetic. And
Gotta love her.
Love Martha Graham. But, you know, so which is about straight lines and even curves and, you know, languid movement. And it's like, well, if your body is not shaped in such a way as to be able to produce those shapes, like that's just not achievable, right? Like,
yeah. Actually, So I think, and I feel like you guys, like you and Chloe, have discussed this before. So apologies for repeating a little bit of information. But
one of the things that I'm learning, and it's taking me a long time to learn it, I'd say I'm still a learner on this, is that just because you say something to someone once, it's like doesn't mean that that's been communicated. You can cross that off your list, and we're done now on that. I think for these important ideas that are quite, you know, in some ways quite sort of antithetical to a lot of the way the industry implicitly operates, I think, you know, a single conversation is nowhere near enough, you know, on this.
Yeah. So it's sort of looping back around to that idea of like a dancer's body. There's actually been some really great New York Times articles. I feel like I sent you the links, but I can look back and maybe include them in the notes if you guys are open to that. Just about what constitutes a dancer's body and really looking at what that is. And I want to just preface what I'm going to say by saying that talking about like a genetic predisposition towards a talent of movement and dance in no way negates the super hard work, the dedication, and the passion of dancers. Like, let me tell you, like, just because you're born with really long legs and a certain amount of external rotation and flexibility, it does not mean that you don't work your you-know-what off every day to make it happen. You know, dancers are amazing. They're scrappy, they're innovative, they're creative, and they're some of the hardest working people I've ever met in my whole life. With that said, I was a trained classical dancer, and I was told from the time that I was 7 or 8 years old that, like, well, you're just not going to make it because your bum is too round and your lordosis is too much, and, you know, all this stuff. And those are things beyond my control. So, you know, I do consider I never reached a pinnacle of dance and, you know, like working for a ballet company or anything like that. But I did have a dance career. It took some different avenues and some different forms. But I think that it's worth saying that it's like a funnel. You know, there's a lot of people that go into the funnel, and then what gets spit out of the other funnel, the other side of the funnel, is like one person that does the thing really well. And that's also not exclusive to dance. That's like baseball or any gymnastics or any other like really elite sport or something expression of athleticism, where there are people that just have an innate talent and an innate physicality. I think where we run into some friction, I'm not going to say problem, but where we run into some friction with that is when, one, those bodies become the model of what the expression of a specific exercise should be.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, one, it's not important, and two, like, I'm never going to be 6 feet tall with super long legs and like my talus popping out of my foot, so this gorgeous arch. That's just not my body.
Right.
And then the other part is, if you go through a teacher training and like that's kind of the picture you see in the manual.
Yeah.
And you're
it's
like,
not kind of.
Yeah, I was trying to be like a little like, it's the picture you see in the teacher manual. You see like some like skinny person, like doing arabesque on the reformer, and you're like, oh my God, is that what I should be like aiming? And I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here, but like, so the client who comes in is like, oh, I've had like really bad chronic low back pain and everything. And you're like, well, shit, like how am I supposed to get that person who's having trouble sit to stand? And like, we're supposed to do that on the other end of it. So just having that nuance of understanding that there is nothing wrong with producing a shape that has a certain bias towards a certain aesthetic, but also realizing that it doesn't mean that any other expression of that shape or movement isn't as valid, and also may indeed be more functional and more helpful to the person that you're teaching in front of you.
Yeah, when I was going through my teacher training with Stop Pilates, all the people in the manual, and I've met most of the people in the Stop Pilates manuals, and they're fantastic people and fantastic teachers, but most of them are ex-dancers, and you can tell when you're looking at them, and they're doing the exercises and displaying an well above average range of motion, for example.
Yeah. And they got the hand, they got the little thing, the thing, Yeah. It was funny because I remember this little tidbit. I was listening. So you're like, how do they do that? I was taught to do that with pencils. So you actually take your hand. This is a tip for anyone who wants ballet hands listening at home. Take your hand and you just thread a pencil through your fingers and then stick your hand out, and there you go. Or if you want balancing technique, then you're supposed to make it look like a rose.
Huh.
So that's my Pilates teaching tip to everyone. Super functional.
How's that?
Oh, Raph, that's great. Look at you.
I sort of see
set
that
you
as
up for
devil.
Yeah, you're like
Devil horns.
It's actually like more like hang 10. Yeah, right.
So that was a visual joke. And if you're listening on a podcast app, we actually record these on video, and you can check us out on YouTube and see all the visuals.
Hand placement, very important.
When I was going through my training, and in fact, when I was teaching teachers for the first several years, I used to refer to people who have below ballet dancer level flexibility as having, quote, tight hamstrings. You can't sit up straight, you can't sit up straight in the spine stretch or the spine twist or whatever because you've got, quote, tight hamstrings. And actually,
hamstrings.
Subsequently, I learned that the average range of motion in the hip is 80 degrees. So it's like the average person.
It's like 75, 80 degrees, right? Yeah.
So that just, if you can't sit up straight in a spine twist, that just makes you normal, right?
Yeah.
Makes you not a ballet dancer.
Right.
But I was going through my training with all of these dancers and looking in the manuals at all the dancers. They were sitting up perfectly straight on their ischial tuberosities with their spines perfectly stacked. And I was sitting here all rounded and needed 4 blocks and whatever to straighten my legs. And
totally.
I think we promote an idea of normal that is truly not normal.
Yeah. And I'm happy, to say at least, stateside, and, I think also like with COVID and everything, like everything's just kind of a global cacophony of images and thoughts, and that's a good thing, I think. If there's one sort of thing that's come out of this shitstorm, it's that, where we're hopefully becoming a little more interconnected. I don't know, maybe. But also on the flip side of that,
you and I are doing it right now. Bam. Yeah. This is interconnection.
How cool is that? California. It's like Tuesday over here. It's Wednesday where you are.
Yeah.
Totally cool. yeah, and those pictures, like I would be interested, I could be totally wrong, but for me, who has always had a very limited range of motion, I'm quite muscular, and I was always, trying to like stretch my, it just was never happening for me. I had more power when I was dancing. I would always like, in ballet classes, oftentimes the men, or at least used to, I don't know if that's it's been a while, but the men used to go last. And so I would always like hang out with the dudes and like jump with the dudes because the music would slow down and they get more time in the air. And I had like big, quote unquote, big quads. And what's the word you guys are using? Bulky. It was bulky. So I'd be interested in those pictures to kind of talk to those people and be like, is that actually comfortable? Does that feel good? To sit really tall on those ischial tuberosities? Like, because I feel that, these things that are sort of these long, languid movements that often look really delicious, even for dancers, for some of us, like, man, they do not feel delicious. And we're doing it because that's the job, and happy to do it because that's the job. But not everything is sort of this like yum fest of gorgeousness, the feeling.
What a important and when you say it, freaking blindingly obvious, but not beforehand, insight. Like, dance looks easy, but doesn't feel easy, and that's the trick, right? That's why you work for decades.
Totally. And we've all had those, and I feel like, people who are Pilates practitioners, the beautiful thing about it is they might get a taste of that, where like, you've been practicing an exercise for a really long time and all of a sudden you just have this like this moment, and I don't even really know what to call it, like maybe embodiment or flow state or whatever it is, and you're like doing the thing, like let's say you're doing like long stretch on the reform or something, and you just have this like thing, and my clients have told me before, they're like, I just feel like I'm floating. It just feels so efficient and effortless. And I'm like, that's great. That's awesome. That's super successful. That's great. And I think that those moments, I can just say from my own personal experience, dancing on stage, when you have those, they're amazing. They're lovely, but it's not that all the time. And so if that's what we're giving to the audience, those are the shapes and the movement pathways we're making that convey that, cool. But if you go to interview some dancers, that's not always the answer that you're going to get, probably. Yeah.
So, all right. So, so what can we as Pilates instructors out in the wild, just teaching regular clients, what can we do to, support and encourage both the dancers and the non-dancers, in amongst our clients?
Yeah, well, I think that just recognizing that there's, like with any client that walks in the door and you say kind of like, you have the chat and you're like, what are your goals and what can I help you with? And sort of, you make a game plan in the beginning just to realize, and actually I should clarify, are you talking about like training dancers as like if a dancer were to come in as a client, or sort of what
I'm more sort of thinking like, dancer? Yeah, good question. I'm sort of more thinking like in a situation where you've got more than one client with you, whether that's online or in person. And, you're describing how you want the movement, So like when I first started teaching, I used to say, let's see if you can move gracefully, slowly, this, that, And I think about it, those are all words from dance now, Yeah. And so and that's great for the dancers, but what about somebody who's just like moves like a, bull in a china shop, like me, That's, I can aspire to those things, but I can aspire as much as I want. I'm never going to be, I'm never going to hit that level. So, so how do we also, like, we've got dancers in our group sometimes who do move that way, and we don't want to say, oh, you're doing it wrong, So how do we encourage both of those groups of people at the same time?
That's a great question. I think, and I also will just total transparency, like my practice is mostly private clients, but I taught a ton of group classes when I was teaching in New York, when I lived there, when I was dancing. And I think that what it comes down to is just looking at people as humans, and dancers, if a dancer is in a group, dancers are going to know what to do. They're going to kind of know what they're going for qualitatively. Other people will as well, but they might have a different lens. And I think this is where that task-based cueing, external cueing really, really comes into play. So instead of saying like, I want you to reach gracefully, maybe just simply giving a direction. I want you to reach to the corner of the room, and then letting people decide the quality that they want to do that with. And what I often do if I'm looking for a qualitative difference, I will still somehow give like a reference point. Like, can you imagine that you're moving through peanut butter? Can you imagine that your limbs are like air? Can you do one of these things that everyone can connect to, so that you're not creating a hierarchy in your class where it's like this inside esoteric thing where like, well, some of you may get this, so the people that can move gracefully, you move gracefully, and kind of to hell with everybody else. I would safely say pretty much everyone, even if you really strongly dislike peanut butter, you probably know what it is, and you probably know that it's like really sticky, and moving through it would feel effortful. That's an assumption I'm making. So I feel that is a good tactic to kind of level the playing field. And then also in a more private setting, just recognizing like, everyone's going to have different goals, and training is goal specific to a certain extent, and it's task specific. So my sort of area of expertise and specialty is not working with dancers. I mostly am sort of in that like 40 to 65 age group, sort of recovering from various stuff, as a lot of Pilates instructors are. But I know some instructors, particularly in New York, that specifically work with dancers, and they're amazing. And what's really amazing about watching them work with that particular client base or demographic is the training looks really different. And I think that's where, as much as we want to be able to serve a vast population, having the ability to niche down a little bit and to understand kind of your ideal client, that sort of almost like segues into like more of a business talk, but like looking at your ideal client and not limiting, but just saying, hey, I'm really interested in this, and I'm going to put some of my mental resources and my continuing education into working with this population of people, and understanding that the teaching techniques that you learn, even sort of like the biomechanical lens that you have to adorn when you're looking at those people, is going to be different. I remember this brilliant physical therapist I was seeing when I was sort of winding down my dancing in New York, and she had worked with a lot of New York City ballet dancers, and I was seeing her for a different problem, and I remember talking to her, and I was just like, I had stopped ballet training when I was 16, and so I transitioned into some more contemporary modern dance, and I was like, oh my gosh, those ballet dancers, they just must be wrecked. I was probably like 20 something years old, and I was seeing this person for some pain, and she was like, Josselyn, their bodies adapt. I feel kind of silly telling you this, Raphael, but just like, she's like, you'd be really surprised. The body's really adaptable. Fast forward almost 20 years later, I'm like, oh yeah, the body's really adaptable. And it will adapt to the task. She was super ahead of her time. She was amazing. Yeah. So that was a good little nugget for me to have, just also in terms of like, okay, well, so if I'm going to choose to work with that population, I'm going to have to understand that specific kind of adaptability, as opposed to working with people who maybe their 55 Pilates or the 55-minute Pilates session, that's the only movement they're getting in a week.
Yeah.
It's going to be, it's the things we do are going to look really different.
And I'm keen to get into the business conversation in a second, but I just want to round out by reflecting on the irony that Joseph Pilates himself moved in such an ungraceful, undancer-like way. Like the man's movement was staccato, kind of rigid, robotic, herky-jerky, like very, very ungraceful in my view.
Yeah. I would agree.
And we'll post a couple of links to YouTube clips of Joseph doing the exercises. Which is understanding the whole history. After reading Cage Lion and talking to John Steele about how Romana kind of became the torchbearer after Joseph passed away, and that's when the ballet thing came in. That's when the whole aesthetic came into it, and like we said, it's neither a good nor a bad thing. It's just a thing.
Right.
But it's interesting that to me that that the ballet kind of thing has become so embedded and so sticky within the Pilates kind of ethos. It's really I think most people, I believe, couldn't tease apart where dance ends and Pilates starts.
No, and I think it's even like, that the subtleties of, when I started getting Pilates teacher jobs, I did not interview, I auditioned.
You audition and you learn the repertoire.
I auditioned.
Yeah.
I do not go to work at a gym. The space I own that has Pilates equipment in it is a studio.
Yeah.
Just these subtle little things that, again, there's no judgment call on them, but they're there. And what's also so interesting, and I think, Cage Lion, just read Cage Lion. If you haven't read Cage Lion, just read Cage Lion. Please read it. It's awesome. It's interesting the role that Romana played just historically, and I'm not a Pilates historian, but, to look at the other people that were around Joseph Pilates, he was hanging out with a lot of modern dancers too. There was Ted Shawn, there was Hanya Holm, there was Ruth St. Denis. He built a studio up at Jacob's Pillow, which is a space where a lot of different dance happens up in the Berkshires in the US. And so I think it's interesting the things that stuck, and also a lot of dancers start doing Pilates before they even know it's Pilates. It is embedded in dance warm-ups to the point where it's just a seamless, that was my introduction to Pilates. I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, I guess I'll do this ab thing when I'm 16, because that's what we're doing. Yeah, right.
And that's fascinating that you bring that up, because I've seen that footage of Ted Shawn. In fact, we used a lot of that as the basis of figuring out the contrology repertoire, because in my view, there's a great YouTube clip of Ted Shawn and an unknown other male dancer doing the contrology series, and I'm about 98% certain it's Joseph Pilates behind the camera, because when they're doing Boomerang, I think he kind of pokes his head into frame for about 3 frames, and you can say, there's Joseph.
Oh, how cool! That's so awesome.
But there's Ted Shawn and this other man who's obviously a dancer as well in Ted Shawn's troupe, being coached by Joseph Pilates himself, in my view, and they move like Joseph, kind of herky-jerky, stop, rigid legs. And it's like, these people are dancers, so that presumably they can move however the heck they want to move, Yeah. But they're choosing to move in this sort of Joseph-like, 19th century gymnastics drill instructor sort of way.
And that was kind of that was sort of Ted Shawn specific. That was a little just it's where I'm like, right, I do have a master's degree in dance. I did learn this stuff 1,000 years ago. He was he did all these pieces about Olympians and people waving flags, and it was very 1930s bronze statue biceps. This man lives the men dancing shirtless. So it but it's interesting that so Pilates first and arabesque on the reformer, that stuck. So maybe it was just the proximity to influence, or the fact that Romana had the studio in New York, or it was later on, so it's more current. But the Ted Shawn thing didn't really seem to stick. So I need to learn more about this. You're piquing my interest. It's super interesting from a historical perspective. Yeah.
It is. It's interesting.
Also, he was a man. Well. He was a dude. We don't often, I'm talking to you and you're a man, but just in terms of who we think about exists in Pilates spaces, that's changing, thank goodness. But who we think about existing in Pilates spaces is a legging clad, I recognize the irony of me saying this, some sort of mildly petite person, usually identifying as female, wearing leggings, doing leg circles or whatever. So,
right. But that's not to say that, if you're a petite female identified legging wearing person who likes leg circles, that you shouldn't be doing Pilates. It's that's awesome.
No, you should. Yeah. We should just be inviting all the other people to the party too. Yeah. Make it a really interesting cocktail mixer, not a boring party. Yeah.
Totally. All right, so let's shift gears into the conversation about business. So tell me your thoughts on the whole dance business model and how that's been inherited.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Ugh. Okay. Well, the dance business model is tricky because, like a lot of other industries, every other industry, there's so many different subsets. And I think there's so many ways that people can identify and exist as a dancer. So I pulled up like some stats, which were kind of interesting to read as a former freelance dancer. Because I was like, oh, wow, that's not my story at all. But cool, that seems to be on the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we'll just go with that. So they were kind of looking at like the average salary. I think it was from like 2019, so probably pre-COVID. Average salary for a dancer in the US is about $30,000 US per year. Average hourly wage, about $19 per hour US dollars. Which is interesting because it's like, I'm like, well, where are you taking these averages from? Like, who are you actually talking to about this stuff? But so people don't, dancers, I don't think anyone gets into dance thinking that they're going to be like rich and famous. You do it because you love it and you do it because it's a passion. So I feel like that's kind of just an important marker to sort of say, okay, this is the average. And I think that's looking at the average of people who are dance teachers as well as professional dancers, freelancers, people who have contracts, Broadway people. They're just like looking at anybody who engages in the dance world and sort of like what they're making. So I feel like that's a good, again, no judgment about like how much people make or their decisions or income or people's choices to live their life. But when we consider a money mindset or taking people who are accustomed to a certain way of existing in a professional environment and put them in a different way of existing in a professional environment, or the people who have created the business model, if they were dancers, and so that's the world they were living in, and now they're studio owners. And I'm talking about like historically a long time ago, and the practices that they sort of developed and continue to enforce. That's not the story that's necessarily true for Pilates. I think that there is more money in Pilates than people think there is. There is a way to exist. Again, I don't think anyone goes into Pilates being like, I'm gonna be Jeff Bezos because I'm teaching Pilates. I think there's a degree of it feeling like a calling, feeling like it's a passion. But I do think that some of this scarcity mindset around teaching and making a decent livable wage in Pilates, some of it can be traced back to some practices in the dance world, and I can get a little more specific about that.
I am so with you on this now.
Yeah.
I don't know I don't know anything about how the dance world works, but I know about the music world. I was a musician all through like professional, and I put air quotes around that because probably $30,000 a year was about what I earned. It's probably would have been better off, bussing tables.
But you do both. Who needs sleep? You don't need sleep. You just rehearse all day, then you work in a restaurant all night, and then you perform on your weekends off. It's totally sustainable.
Right.
100%.
And, like dance, I think, most people who are musicians, consider it a calling and feel like it's such an honour, it's such a privilege, it's such a great pleasure to be able to perform in front of people and get paid for it. Like, that's incredible. And it's like, oh, you only paid me, $19 an hour. Oh, what do I care? Because
Thank you so much for paying me $19 an hour. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things I was thinking about too, where it's, again, I could really only speak for myself, but I lived in the dance world for a very, very long time. There's this thing about when you go on an audition and you get a dance gig and you get the job, and it's like you are just, or I, whatever, the person, the dancer is just so elated. It's like, oh my God, I got the job. And probably the same musician. I would have, my father's a musician, so I think I have a little bit of touch point with that. But, just, you got the gig. It's like, I won the lottery. I get to, oh, wow. There's so much competition. I remember going to cattle calls with 600-700 dancer, it's for one job. So the thought of being like, so when's my break? So how much am I getting paid? Do I get benefits? Like, is there like a 401k situation here? You know, all of this stuff, that's not what you're thinking about. And I think some of that is a younger dancer. Some of that just comes with youth, you know, not to sound patronizing, but it's the truth, you know. And so as you become older, I think if I had stuck around in the dance world longer, like past my early 30s, I probably would have gotten a little savvier about grant writing and asking for money and funding and sort of crafting my life in a different way. But when that's your experience in terms of being an employee or interacting with an employer, which could either be a studio director or a choreographer, you kind of don't know how to advocate for yourself in another business environment. And especially when that studio environment is kind of embedded with some stuff that maybe isn't so great either, then we run into some issues of feeling that the actual job is not sustainable, which is a shame. Yeah.
I think, you know, there are many issues at play there, and I agree with you about, you know, the youth piece. You know, when I was 22, I didn't know nothing about nothing. And, you know, also I think now in the internet era, it is becoming easier for people to make their own way. Like I think about, you know,
Yes.
when I was back in the sort of 1990s and 2000s, when I was, you know, playing music full time, the only avenue to make a living was, you know, for 99% of people, is you play at, you know, events or, you know, bars or whatever, and that's like, you know, $80 a gig sort of thing.
Right.
Or, you know, if you were just incredibly lucky, talented, hardworking, and just like all the planets lined up, then you get to release some kind of thing and, you know, it sells, you know, lots, right? But that is like 1% of 1% of 1% of people. But now, and you were sort of like, if you wanted to release, you were kind of beholden to the system. You had to go through a record label and, you know, they were the gatekeepers and they advanced you a certain amount and then they kept, you know, like 80% of the profits and, you know, gave you 20%, 20 cents per album or whatever that they sold for $30. But now, like there are musicians that have actually found ways to, you know, like you alluded to with grant writing and creating things for yourself. Like there's a group I follow called Scary Pockets, and they're just a covers band, right? They just play other people's funk tracks. Just a group of musicians in LA, and it's not even the same people every time. It's just two guys, and they just have a revolving. So one guy plays keyboards, one plays guitar, then they have a revolving crew of drummers, bass players, keyboard players, guitarists, singers, and they release these funk covers of non-funk songs. Right? So they release like Johnny Cash songs or Fleetwood Mac songs or whatever, but they do funk versions of them. And they've got like, I've got them up here on YouTube. They've got a couple who've got like multiple million downloads per episode. So, you know, I mean, I don't know exactly how the YouTube algorithm works, but I can only imagine they're making pretty decent money out of YouTube monetization there, you know.
And there are some dancers that are kind of sort of exploring similar avenues to it. Again, you know, it's been a long time since I've done stage performing, but, you know, there are some people who have huge Instagram followings and are like making not reels, like Instagram reels, but actually like making short dance for cameras and putting them up and getting patronized for their work. And it's awesome. I mean, that's where I said before, like dancers are scrappy. Like they are gonna find a way to get their work out there. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Yeah.
I think though, like you say, in Pilates, because even though sort of aesthetically and culturally, Pilates has a lot of that dance sort of DNA, actually Pilates is part of the fitness industry. It's not part of the dance industry. And so from a business, you know, mechanically in terms of the way the business works, you know, you know, customers come and pay us a fee to do a session. It's like that's not how dance performances work, you know. From a financial perspective, actually, you know, it is possible to make really good money in the Pilates business, but, and this is, you know, this just boils my blood, and I want to be part of changing this.
Get on it, Raph. Do it.
That like so many Pilates instructors, in my view, have a mentality like, musicians and dancers, like we said, it's like it's a calling. I'm passionate about this. It's an honor that I get to do this. Therefore, and they see it as kind of a dichotomous situation. There's like, if I feel that way about it, then I shouldn't make money at it. I shouldn't expect to make money. In fact, I should expect not to make money at it. Like if I go to make money,
it's very pious.
Drives me bananas.
Yeah, it drives me crazy too. And I think that there's this thing too of just, this isn't so much dance, this is just like my pet peeve. It's like, you're not taking advantage of anybody. If you price your services well, and, there are people who are far more learned in this than I love listening to Leslie, Jenna, people who you've had on the podcast before. They're awesome, amazing. Yeah. And they've really put in the hours to make a very succinct, clear message around this. And I really appreciate their work. And I'm right there with them where it's like, if you're pricing your services correctly, and by pricing your services correctly, I mean like correctly so that you can eat, so you can live, so you can pay your rent where you live. If you're looking at your clientele, and then you get that like reciprocal happiness, like someone pays you for the session, you give a great session, woohoo, everyone wins, And I think that, looping back to the dance world, it's just a completely different model. It's still a model of sort of what I call, or what other people will call, just like patronage. It's grant writing. It's this. It's not like, we're not really in a retail business, but like we're exchanging a specific service for a specific rate, and so it's more like transactions that are happening. And at least in my understanding of the way funding of the dance world works, that doesn't happen. They have ticket sales, and you have season sort of supporters, especially in the ballet world. They'll support a season, you buy season tickets, but really the money is coming from people who really want to support dance, and thank goodness they want to support dance so we can have dance and these rock star athletes have some place to perform. That's awesome. But it's an entirely different model. So when that model gets sort of infiltrated or superimposed, or it's kind of, well, this is the way we've always done things in the Pilates world, then we're not reimagining how to have a healthier business model separate from kind of like the patronage model, if that makes any sort of sense.
100%. Yeah. I think, for people, and if you're listening to this, and you've got a business or a Pilates, career where you're not making a lot of money, it's like, I'm not having a go at you, but and if you genuinely don't want to make money, well, freaking awesome, great for you. But it's my belief. I've been poor, right? I spent my 20s and 30s as a musician, eating freaking 2-minute noodles 5 nights a week, and all the driving around in a shitty car.
In the States, we call it top ramen. You eat top ramen.
Right. And now in my early 50s, I'm 50. I just turned 50 this year. I have a business that generates $5 million of revenue. We have 36 staff. Like I don't know if I think of myself as rich, but I'm certainly comfortable, and we have a profitable business. And I've been poor and I've been rich, and I tell you which one I fucking prefer. And it's really tough at the moment with COVID, and with lockdowns, and with restrictions on the number of people you can have in a given amount of space, and with public, concern about, health and all of that stuff. It's really, really tough. But people are finding ways to make money. People are finding ways to make money. People are making lemonade out of these lemons. They're doing online sessions. They're doing all kinds of different things that they weren't doing 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it is, people still need to move. People still need to be healthy.
Absolutely. And people want to be told, to a certain extent, I think too, and this is very separate from the sort of the subject we're talking, but just, and what I found transitioning to an online studio is that, especially in times of sort of that feel very chaotic, a movement practice, whether you're a dancer, whether you're a Pilates practitioner, whatever, is like one of the most securely grounding things that I think people have. And my model and my tiny little business is I really try to promote people having standing appointments. It works for me. I'm here 5 days a week teaching. That's what works for my business. It's not going to work for everybody. So when we went online, I was just like, this is what we're doing, people. Of course you're keeping your once a week session or your twice a week session. Why wouldn't you? So, and not like, I'm so great and you need me all the time, but just like, this is your practice. And unless there is some other reason, like you lost your job, or there was a lot of people that had a lot of, negotiation with children and childcare and all these things, but, actually we can loop this back into the dance thing. I think that's one positive thing about a little bit of the dance world and Pilates, and I can't speak for other fitness modalities because I don't really exist in them, but the idea that this is a practice or whatever you want to call it, and that what we're doing is something that doesn't necessarily have this like pinnacle goal, I've reached it, so now I'm going to stop doing it, but that this is progress over perfection. This is a practice that we engage with that has to change. And so like I was a dancer in New York that had no money. I couldn't afford to go to class sometimes. Guess what? I found a way to train on my own. Sometimes it was in my living room in Brooklyn, with my 4 other roommates. So I think that that's not like, I'm so amazing, so I did that. But it is something that I'm happy I had that experience. That's a positive thing that I can give to my clients and say, hey, maybe it's not going to look like the craziness that I did, but I know that this is going to improve your life. And I know that you doing this regularly and you staying committed to your practice, even though it looks really different, is going to be beneficial to you. And then on the flip side, business-wise, it's beneficial to me, which is beneficial to them because I can stay open.
Well, that's the whole thing about business is it creates value for both the person delivering the service and the person purchasing the service, right? So the clients are better off and the business owner's better off. Everyone's better off, right? If the clients stay at home and don't exercise, they're not better off, And so by doing everything you can to get them in those sessions, you're actually doing them a favour as well as doing yourself a favour.
Yeah. So
I think I see a lot of, and this makes me kind of upset as well. Is I see a lot of people, and it comes from such a kind place, right? It comes from such a place of love and care and compassion that people in the Pilates world, are giving away stuff at the moment. In COVID, it's like so many free classes online, so many $5 classes online. But the thing is, it's coming from such a place of like wanting to help people. It's like, people who have lost their job, people who have, can't afford it. It's like, all of that stuff, which I think isn't such an admirable sentiment, but I think it's so freaking misplaced. Here's the thing. Who does Pilates? Mostly professionals, knowledge workers who hasn't lost their job in COVID. Knowledge workers who can work from home, right? So if you're a knowledge worker, you're probably working from home, earning the same 6-figure income you were earning pre-COVID.
Probably saving a little bit of dough because you're not going out
to
traveling.
Eat at restaurants, not traveling, like not driving your car, you've got all this extra cash, right? And now
you know who needs Pilates in this time? Who those people could patronize? Dancers. No, I'm joking, but a little bit. But it's that same model of like restaurant employees, dancers, freelance artists. These. If you want to have a model where you're giving back a little bit, like maybe you bump up your prices a little and then say, hey, now I have this little bit of a nest egg that I can give to the people who actually need it right now.
Right. And that's what we do, right? So we have this really profitable business that, we serve people and we charge, an amount that makes it worth our while and worth their while, so everyone's a winner. And now I have time and capacity to give stuff back like this podcast, which we do for free every week. And that's because I don't have to see clients all day just to pay the rent, So now I have the luxury of spending, I spend 7 hours on every Wednesday recording podcasts and Q&As, everything. It's all free,
That's awesome.
So, but that's not because I'm some great philanthropist. It's like, well, I can afford that. That's a luxury, that I
Yeah,
that I
you've built it into your business model. So I think that's another thing too. It's the business plan, the business model is. If I'm gonna, kind of make a hokey dance analogy or something, it's like you're choreographing a dance. You have to just sit down and kind of solve the problem and make it work and fit in the things that are important to you. Yeah, which I think sometimes people, there's a calculator. I think you sort of divide your weeks by your this and by your that and do the thing, and then you come up with this hourly number. And sometimes you look at it and you go, how am I going to make that per hour? And then you just build up to it slowly, so that you can kind of incorporate the other things you want to do with your life. Yeah.
I think I'm interested to know your experience with this, because my view is that in terms of raising prices, is that the main, if not the only limitation to how high your prices are, is your own fear about asking for that. Basically being able to say the number with a straight face. Is the problem.
And confidently, and I think also too, just sort of it not just coming out of the blue, not necessarily giving people warning, but just saying, okay, very clearly, these are the reasons. No, you don't have to look at my books, but this is what I'm going to do every year, every 2 years, and just say this is what it is, and be open to having those individual conversations with clients that maybe that one off, it's not going to be possible for whatever reason, and just knowing that like any other situation or industry, there are nuances, there's a touch of gray area, but also staying steadfast in kind of your resolve to be this is what needs to happen for my business to stay healthy. So if my business is not healthy, I can't keep you healthy. So that's sort of that's my little tagline I give people when I do a price increase. I need to keep my biz healthy so I can keep you healthy, or help keep you healthy.
Did you go through, was there a point where you kind of increase your prices significantly? So I'm imagining you're doing annual or whatever price increases to keep up with the cost of living index, but was there a time where you realised, I'm way undercharging and I need to put my prices up?
Not necessarily. I think that, when I was first starting out teaching in New York, I started doing mat work, and I was going to people's homes. And so what's interesting, I did my research being the super kind of crazy type A person that I am. And I was okay, this is the going rate. And I looked at personal trainers. I actually looked at other industries, and I was kind of okay, again, thinking about way back when, I'm a dancer, there's a lot of dance and Pilates, what does this mean for the business? What are the assumptions I'm working off of? So I started to look at what is that personal trainer charging to go to that person's home on the Upper East Side? Okay, well maybe I need to be a little more aligned with that because my education is a little bit more than that person, what value am I offering to the client? So what actually ended up happening is I inherited some clients from other instructors, or they were kind of cleaning house or whatever. And so that was the point where I felt like I was undercharging, where it was, I had to kind of come up with a reasonable midline, because I hate throwing people under the bus, but the other teachers that I was kind of inheriting clients from, they were significantly undercharging. And so I came in with sort of my business model, even for my tiny little business, which was running around with a bag in New York City to people's apartments and teaching Pilates in their homes. Knowing that I had to get paid for my travel time, I had to, there were a bunch of other things that needed to be built into that hourly rate. So, but I also kind of knew that if I were going to do 150% increase, I might lose that client. So that's where it becomes okay, I need to give a little. And then if I'm planning on, hopefully this person will stay with me for a couple of years. If I want to do this for a couple of years, then I can incrementally increase. In terms of my business now, I feel like I set a very fair price, and I increase either every year. I didn't do one when COVID was happening, just because there was way too much shifting, so I just decided to kind of keep things as they were. But because what I'm comfortable with in my model, I have a very small private studio. I just have space for duets, and so I really encourage my clients to be regular in their practice. So I have a lot of clients that come 2 to 3 times per week. So I do recognize the financial investment they're making in those sessions. So that also influences the way that I price my sessions too. Yeah. So I feel like I have a very stable business. So I don't know if you were to talk to somebody else, maybe down the road, and they were kind of like wanting a bunch of new clients to come in, they might want to charge a higher hourly rate for just those drop-in sessions as opposed to, people purchasing packages or whatever. Yeah.
Well, I think, there's no one, just like in
there is no one way.
There's no one right way, right? So it depends on what's important to you, and if stability and predictability, regularity is important. And, obviously you've got to pay your mortgage or your rent and, put your kids through school and all of that.
Totally.
But it's not like, they who, make the most money win. It's they who create a lifestyle that they love, win.
Yeah, and hopefully a place, whether it's your own studio or you're working for somebody else, a place where you walk in and you feel like proud and happy to be there. And I also, when I was teaching in New York, I was still, dancing not a ton, but enough. And so it was hard for me to have that consistency to build up that clientele, which is part of the reason why I taught more group classes. So I think, obviously we would like to cultivate a following because that leads to sustainable income. But depending on what else you're doing in your life, if Pilates is not your full-time career, you're kind of, like, I want to dance, or I want to be a musician, or I'm a lawyer and I teach Pilates on the weekends, or whatever it looks like, to recognize that and to be okay with it. I taught with a ton of people who were still, they would go off for 6 weeks and they would dance in a musical on tour, and then they would come back and teach at the studio. Those were not necessarily the instructors that had like super regular clientele. They kind of had to build back up. They had a few people that were willing to sort of ride with them as they were going to go perform and then come back. It looks different, and different is fine. Yeah.
Another interesting thing that I've noticed in myself in relation to pricing is that, I consider myself someone who does this as a calling, and I love what I do, and I just get an immense amount of satisfaction. I don't teach clients these days. I spent 15 years doing that, but nowadays I teach teachers, and I just love it. I really feel passionate and excited, engaged in flow when I'm teaching. So in some respects, I would still do it if I didn't get paid, because I just love it so much. But what I've noticed in myself is that we've put our prices up over the years quite a bit. When we first started out, we were way undercharging, and I didn't know anything about business, and hadn't done the numbers and all of that stuff. And I was like, oh, we've got so many clients, but how come we don't have any money in the bank?
This is great. I'm so busy. That must mean I'm successful.
And what I observed is that as we've put the prices up, I've actually become more motivated to produce high quality outcomes for my students. Now, I didn't think that would be possible, because I thought, I'm so passionate about this, I love it so much that I'm just absolutely giving my all to it, and I don't care how much money I make, right? But now that I'm charging double what we used to charge, I actually feel like even more motivated. I feel like duty bound, because we're charging, a good price. I feel like, no, I really owe it to these people to give them the best possible education. So I've actually noticed that even in myself, just an improvement in the quality of the work that I do as a result of charging more, which, really surprises me in hindsight, because, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, could you improve the quality of your work if you tried a bit harder? I'll be like, no, I'm freaking work 15 hours a day already.
Maxed out.
Yeah. But no, there was more in the tank there. And I discovered that by just being able to say the number with a straight face, and then thinking, shit, now I better deliver on that,
Well, and I think that's also a really interesting and great way to, kind of keep things fresh and just sort of seeking new information and updating. And also, less about like, oh, I have so much money in the bank now, so everything's going to be fine and I'm going to be happy, because, that's not really, sometimes they don't equate each other. But a way to avoid burnout, I would imagine too, so that you feel that reciprocity again, where it's like, okay, well, I'm charging a bit more, so I have to level up. And then, at least for myself, when I level up and I get those extra bits of information, I learn something new, I feel like I want to deliver more to my clients, then it's an energizing experience for me. I feel like I'm engaging, even though it's me in my studio. Sometimes online with a group of people, but mostly just with a client. I feel like I'm engaging with my craft and my industry in a more robust way. And I agree with you. I don't know if I would feel that if I felt that I was undercharging and looking at my business bank account every month and feeling like, oh man, I worked so much and now what? I don't know if I would. I think it assists with the drive, and I hope that doesn't sound greedy. It's just more that it gives me license to be able to grow.
100%.
Yeah.
I don't think it sounds greedy.
Me personally. Okay, cool. Charge more. People listening, up your prices. Make it reasonable. Do it.
Yeah.
Reach out on Instagram if you're like, but I don't want to. And I'll be like, it's okay, just do it. Here's some business coaches for you. I'm not a business coach. Here's some other people you can talk to.
I bought a book recently, a few months ago, by a guy called Blair Entz. He's not in the Pilates space. He's in design. He's a visual designer, and he owns a visual design firm. And he's actually moved out of visual design into teaching business to visual designers. So he basically teaches people how to make money as visual designers. And his book is called Pricing Creativity. No affiliation. I've got no affiliation with these people. And so he's basically saying you should charge on value, not on time, right? So don't charge per hour, charge by the value that you deliver. And this book, which I'm holding in my hands, was $300 US, $300 US, right?
He's delivering a lot of value.
Well, I've easily made more than $300, from the stuff I learned in this.
That's amazing.
But like he was, basically, he's got a lot of YouTube and podcasts and all that stuff where I'd engaged with him and learned about his philosophy, and, his thesis is charge more, right? Yeah. That's the base.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nuance to it and there's a lot of layers, and you should buy the book. But, at the bare bones, it's like, charge more. And then I looked up the book and I was actually impressed that it was $300, because if his whole message is charge more and then there's $1.99 on
it's like
Kindle,
$25 or something, you'd be like, whatever. Sure,
right? He's not taking his own medicine. But I was impressed by that.
Yeah, I think these are subjects and conversations. I know that I'm kind of like in dancer Pilates like mind for this conversation, but just in general, these industries that exist, kind of not necessarily on the fringe, but we don't think of like Pilates and dance and music, even though Pilates is of the fitness world, which is just bajillions of dollars industry that has a whole machine behind it just selling a bunch of stuff to people all the time. Pilates is this kind of like weird subsection, I feel, in some ways. These are conversations that people need to get comfortable having. They need to be comfortable learning this information, and I think that it needs to feel very applicable. And to be perfectly honest, they were very uncomfortable for me, and they still are a little bit, and some of that probably is my personality. But a lot of it goes back to just that, like, dancer mentality of the powers that be will bestow upon you what you deserve based on how much work you put in. Oh, and by the way, you should spend a ton of money. That's something we did really, like dance training as classical musician training or whatever is very expensive. And so the investment, it's tricky there. Yeah. It gets really, really tricky. Yeah.
Well,
And that's not something I feel that is beneficial to carry over. I love my clients. I value our relationships. I firmly believe that what I am offering to them is worth the price that I am charging, and I do not feel that they are bestowing upon me some patronage.
They're not patrons.
I feel that they are my clients. We have wonderful, meaningful relationships. We collaborate together. I learn a ton from them. But I am confident that the service that I'm offering warrants the price I am charging.
And I would say, just back to what you said, that physiotherapist said to you in New York about the dancers, is that I think for most of us it is uncomfortable to have those conversations, to put an extra zero on the end of your prices, to, whatever it might be, but that we can adapt. And we get better.
Yeah, and studio culture can adapt too. And I made the choice for many reasons I had independent contractors working for me, and I made the choice to not bring them on as employees. But I think as this conversation continues and the Pilates industry starts to change, we don't have to be. We can keep the parts that are really great and really positive, and then we can say just like a thank you and goodbye to the parts that are not. And I don't know if the employee model, how globally that's going to fit. I think there are people who are way more learned than I am about business and about law that can speak to that with greater authority. But I do feel that, there's sort of one part client education, there's one part new blood coming into studio ownership. And looking at business practices to protect employees, and some of that, I was saying client education, but I think, we have to, in a reasonable and appropriate way, educate our clients about kind of what happens in studios too, So it's we don't get those people who are just teaching 12 sessions in a row without a break, that's not cool. You can't teach your best with that, it's still a job.
Yeah. And I talked to Corey Sterling a few weeks ago. He's a lawyer in this space. And, one of the things we talked about was the employee versus contractor situation. And, so he's Canadian. He has a fair bit of knowledge about US law as well. And also...
He's amazing!
He's amazing. And we also have an internal counsel within our business, a lawyer within our business here in Australia. So we employ 36 people around the world. We have employees in the US, in the Philippines, in Egypt, in Australia, and so we bump up against employment law, quite a bit
often. And international employment law, that must make it a little more interesting for you guys.
And so, I'm certainly not a lawyer, but, my understanding after running a business for a couple of decades is that basically, unless your teachers choose their own shifts each week and could send in anyone else without your approval to substitute, without any notice, they're employees. By law, they're employees, and that you might have a contract with them and they might be, contractors in name, but actually, according to the IRS and according to the Labour, Bureau or whatever, they're legally employees. And I think that probably applies to about 95% of Pilates instructors, working in the industry. Obviously, if you're in a situation where as an instructor you're paying rent for the use of the space, well, that's different. That truly is a contract arrangement. And if you're someone who literally just works, sort of does subs here and there, that's a contract arrangement. But if you expect me to show up every Tuesday at 5 p.m. and if, I can't just ring you up at 4 p.m. and say, by the way, I'm not coming in this week.
Sorry, not coming in. Yeah.
That's an employee situation.
Yeah, and I think too, sometimes it's sort of the employers, they need to get their act together and we just do this, and the studio owners and blah, blah, blah. Well, it's also teachers. If you were to I was very comfortable with my independent contractor status when I was a younger teacher. So I think it goes on both sides. And so I really liked that flexibility. I was still dancing, so there's a shift that will be interesting to watch, I think, over the next couple years to see how the entire of the industry sort of navigates this, because at least I can only speak in California, but in California, it's sort of going through the legal system right now, and there's, different little industries that are kind of having their own, what's the word I'm looking for? They're basically exempt from the new law. I think like journalists and some other industries kind of got like little exemptions from this based on the nature of their work. So I think fitness studios are in this interesting gray area. And so we'll have to, I knew from me, the independent contractors I had working for me, they were like, we don't want to be your employees. And I was like, okay, well then bye, we'll just have coffee every once in a while and good luck. So there was a mutual sort of not wanting quite to make that shift yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of instructors I have talked with, they think in terms of per session. So like when we talk about pay, they think, how much do I get paid per session? Whereas if you go to a regular person in the corporate world, they talk per year. What's my annual salary? Yeah,
they want that salary.
Yeah,
and bonus and all these other things. Yeah.
And so I think to me that's kind of like it's just kind of one of those indicators of the way that we think by and large in the Pilates world is kind of very short term and
short term, hourly, kind of non-committal. And again, those are gross generalizations. I think this is less about sort of individual behavior and more like what's embedded in the culture of the industry. So I'll agree with you. And that's why in term, even I think about my little business, I'm like, okay, well, like someone buys a 10 pack and then I deduct an hourly. It's a very hourly model, but that's not necessarily the way it has to be. So if I were to sit down and sort of imagine a different thing, maybe that looks like a membership or a subscription, or who knows what could actually work out. But I think again, looking as an industry as the parts that are working, and especially with COVID and things going online and just the boundaries geographically just sort of blown apart now. What do we want our industry to look like?
Yeah. Well,
I don't know.
We track our when I ran a studio, I used to do that exact same math. But these days, we're not in the studio business anymore. We're in the education business, so it's a little bit different. But we track our monthly and annual revenue per employee, right? So for every full-time employee that we have, we know how much on average, not everyone gets the same pay, but on average, we pay this much per employee. And so we know we need to earn more than that per employee to keep the doors open.
Yeah, gives you a good baseline. Very good baseline,
And so rather than think like, this is an hourly rate or an hourly service, we just go, okay, this month we spent this much on wages and we made this much in revenue, therefore we made this much per employee. So that's what's one of the key ways that we think about it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other education, and you've spoken about this with Chloe before, there's a lot of other education that even as an employee or a contractor, whatever your sort of employment status is as a fitness instructor, Pilates instructor, you're still cultivating your client base. You're still, in essence, sort of, even if you're working under an umbrella institution, like you want to build your own little micro business within that within the bigger business to serve the bigger business so that you can continue to be employed. So there's that reciprocity again. I think that's a mindset and that's a skill that needs developing, just like learning how to do 27 exercises on the Fitball, because as we've mentioned before in this conversation, like if the business isn't healthy, who are you helping?
Yeah.
No one.
100%. I think that's very interesting that you say that especially now, I think since COVID and since the internet and just the massive sort of ubiquity of social media and online classes, that everyone who teaches Pilates, has a business within a business. Even if you're a full-time employee of Equinox or whatever, it's like, well, you've got a social media following, your
Totally.
clients, and so even if you were to leave your employment, like you certainly shouldn't, legally you can't solicit those clients, but inevitably,
no, but they're probably interacting with you in a different way on a different platform somehow anyway. Yeah, so that's something that needs to be recognized also. Yeah, totally.
So you totally have a business, and even so I think the mindset of like, oh, I'm going to just be a humble cog in the machine and to show up and do my work, it's like that's good. That's long gone now.
No. Yeah. I don't think so. It's you have to you got to show up, you got to stay engaged and cultivate your people, even if those people exist within the umbrella of another organization. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's another thing that, that kind of collaboration, kind of another positive that comes from Danceland too. Even though you have a choreographer that's which can be sort of a slippery slope, but you have somebody who's sort of at the helm of the creative process, but there's so much collaboration of the people that bring whatever vision to fruition. And so there's a lot of negotiation that needs to happen on every level of that. So that's something I think that can stay. That's a good thing to stick around.
Collaboration, negotiation, both important.
Yeah, and creativity, and I think people just, being willing to listen to new ideas and not just say, well, that's not the way that we've done things before, so that's not going to work, Who knows?
And if you're a Pilates Elephants listener, which you are if you're listening to this, then that's not a problem for you, because we're all about the new ideas.
Because you're all about us.
This has been an awesome conversation, Josselyn.
Oh, thanks. I went to so many places that in my crazy 9 pages of notes on my iPhone, I had no idea that it was going to go. So how awesome is that? In the dance world, we call that improvisation.
Yeah,
sorry,
improv.
I had to get one more little thing in there. You have that in the music world too, I know. So cool.
We do.
So we're all on the same page. You do. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Good talk.
Good talk. Thank you so much, Raph. What an honor. Thank you so much for your podcast. It's just a real pleasure to listen to you and Chloe and all your guests every week. I'm so grateful to you guys.
Well, it's such a pleasure, and I love the podcast medium because we're able to to reach a large number of people. But one of the probably the only big drawback of it, as far as I'm concerned, is mostly the people can't talk back with us. So I've been talking with a bunch of people, Pilates instructors in the industry, just to learn about the industry, learn what people's experience is and what makes you cranky and what's awesome and what confuses you. And by the way, if you're listening to this, if you want to talk to me, there's a link in the show notes. You can book a call, and literally all we're going to do is talk about your experience of working or owning a business in the Pilates world. I just want to understand, because this is fundamentally a one-way medium, podcast.
Yeah.
So, to understand what's coming back the other way is really valuable, and this has been a tour de force in that. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.